How rich is Vladimir Putin? On paper, not very. But follow the trails that reporters and investigators have chased for years, and a different picture starts to form. One built on friends, shell companies, and assets that never appear under his name. To understand how that system is alleged to work, you have to start in the 1990s in St. Petersburg. Putin was a city official then, handling foreign investment and trade under Mayor Anatoly Sobchak. This was the wild era of post-Soviet business, when licenses, export rights, and city contracts could turn fortunes overnight. A local council investigation at the time accused Putin's office of mishandling deals. He denied wrongdoing, and the episode faded, but it left a footprint. He was close to a small circle of businessmen who prospered as the city opened up. In 1996, some of those men formed a lakeside dacha cooperative called Ozero. It looked ordinary on the surface, neighbors sharing a stretch of forest, but the names would later matter. Yuri Kovalchuk, Arkady and Boris Rotenberg, Gennady Timchenko. By the mid-2000s, a little-known lender called Bank Russia was growing quickly. In 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned it and called it the personal bank for senior Russian officials. That label wasn't a courtroom verdict, but it echoed years of reporting that tied the bank's expansion to Putin's associates. The idea that began to take shape was subtle. You don't put assets in your own name. You help your friends win deals and build empires, and they hold things that benefit you. Publicly, Putin's own asset declarations stayed modest: an apartment, a garage, a small income. But privately, the roster of companies tied to his friends kept winning. The Sochi Olympics became a showcase. Costs soared into the tens of billions, and firms linked to the Rotenbergs, Timchenko, and others took on pipelines, roads, ski lifts, and stadiums. Critics at the time said these contracts minted new billionaires. Supporters argued the work was risky and built vital infrastructure. Then came the document leaks that pried open a few doors. In 2016, the Panama Papers revealed a network of offshore companies controlled by Sergei Roldugin, a classical cellist and an old friend of Putin's. It sounded odd until you looked at the transactions. Hundreds of millions flowing through shell firms in places like the British Virgin Islands, with loans from Russian state banks and links to deals inside the country. The specifics remain murky, but the pattern matched what many suspected. Wealth parked with trusted people, far from public ledgers. Another thread tugged at that same tapestry: real estate. In 2021, opposition investigators released a sprawling film about a vast estate on the Black Sea near Gelendzhik, labeling it Putin's Palace. The video argued that companies tied to Putin's circle built and funded it through complex layers. The Kremlin said the president didn't own it. Later, Arkady Rotenberg said the property belonged to him. What stood out wasn't a single deed, but the way ownership ducked and weaved: shell firms, long-term leases, friends who could appear and disappear on paper. By 2022, when Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine redrew the map of sanctions, Western governments stopped trying to sanction Putin's meager listed assets and instead went after the network. Bank Russia was already on the list. So were Kovalchuk, the Rotenberg brothers, Timchenko, and Igor Sechin of Rosneft. Investigators began tracing yachts and jets, not because they could prove personal ownership, but because crews, maintenance records, or corporate links pointed back to the same inner circle. So, how does that add up to the eye-popping estimates, 50 billion, 100 billion, even more, that sometimes appear in headlines? They're not balance sheets. They're models built from pieces. The value of state contracts steered to allies, the equity stakes those allies hold in oil, gas, and banking, the properties and vessels used by people close to the president, and the offshore cash flows that surface in leaks. That's the core challenge. The system, as described by reporters and watchdogs, is designed to be deniable. Shell companies file in island registries. Assets are registered to cousins, college friends, or holding companies that swap hands after a news story breaks. When pressure builds, ownership changes, loans appear, yachts sail to friendlier ports. From the outside, you mostly see the wake. Still, there are anchors you can point to. The US and EU have repeatedly sanctioned Bank Russia as a financial hub for the elite. The Panama and Pandora Papers placed people close to Putin inside offshore networks moving enormous sums. Contracts for national projects and events landed again and again with a familiar group of firms. And major properties and vessels used by associates have sparked seizures and court fights across Europe. If that method exists, the stakes are larger than a number on a page. It shows how political power in modern Russia might be tied to private wealth without ever admitting the link. It explains why sanctions target friends instead of paychecks. And it suggests why, after decades in power, the question, how rich is Vladimir Putin, still can't be answered with receipts, only with the long, looping story of how money moves when the state itself is the lock, the key, and the safe.